Sports Talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the sports director at WGN Radio, the voice of Northwestern Athletics. Please welcome Dave Eanet to the program. Dave, great to have you on. How are you?
I'm doing great, John. Great to be with you.
How'd the Super Bowl go yesterday for you?
Well, it was interesting because I was in Champaign during the Northwestern Illinois game and left Champaign, I think, a little bit after 4 by the time I got on the road. And so I knew I wasn't going to make kickoff. So I had set my DVR to record it. And I avoided any exposure to the score or anything that might have tipped me off to what was happening in the game. And I waited until I got home and just got everything set and sat down and grabbed the remote and started to watch it. So probably about an hour behind schedule. And it was an interesting way to watch. And I've watched a lot of football games that way, but you know, it's different because I actually cared about seeing some of the commercials. So I couldn't just fast forward through them. But it took a while to get through it, but I enjoyed it. You know, I thought it was a good game. I thought it was entertaining. There are plenty of big plays, plenty of good storylines. It hasn't always been the case with Super Bowls. And I think, John, this may be a little, I've seen every one of them. So they've all occurred in my lifetime. And I have to say that this is one that, you know, there used to be the narrative on the Super Bowl for a long time was that the game never matches the hype. And it's really hard, I think, for any event to match the kind of hype that you get for the Super Bowl. But I have to say, I do think that if you go back over the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years or so, I think most of the games have been pretty decent, or at least there's been a compelling storyline, unlike some earlier games when, you know, they were kind of either blowouts, major blowouts, or they just weren't that enticing.
What made yesterday's game so compelling to you?
Well, I think part of it obviously was the idea that the Bengals, and nobody saw that coming, right? I mean, that's always, I think, a good storyline. And then the fact that not only were they an underdog, even though they weren't a prohibitive underdog by any stretch, but that they were there with the lead with 6 minutes to go when the Rams got the ball. And I think that was part of it. I think the personalities involved, I think with the Rams, you had this kind of eclectic group where you have some guys who've been with the franchise for a long time and have established careers in the NFL, but never got a chance to do anything like this. Or maybe they had one Super Bowl, but haven't won it. And then you had the Matthew Stafford story and the Odell Beckham story. And then you look at Cincinnati and you've got this upstart and Joe Burrow, and basically a team that hasn't been in the spotlight very much, a coach who was under a lot of fire and probably still is. And I just think that all those factors kind of combined. I really like watching Burrow. I mean, I enjoyed watching him in college, and look, the guy competes, and he may not be the best quarterback in his own conference, you know, when all things are considered, when you've got Mahomes and Josh Allen and people like that out there. But I'll have to tell you, I think you like having him on your side. And I think if you look over Matthew Stafford's body of work over his years in Detroit, and you just wonder if he had any kind of a team around him, how he would be perceived today compared to, you know, now at maybe not the twilight of his career, but certainly getting up there. He's sort of had a renaissance in his career now in Los Angeles. And I think people have realized how good this guy is.
How do you rank that last part of the drive for the Rams with Stafford and Kupp really taking control and driving downfield and scoring?
I mean, I think it was a great chemistry lesson, right? I mean, clearly these guys have put the work in. And I think when you consider that he had lost a guy who was early in the game a go-to weapon for him in Beckham, and really had to lean heavily on Kupp, certainly there. I mean, he tried some other guys during the course of the game, Jefferson, Ben Skoranek, who played here at Northwestern and then played at Notre Dame. And I think he got maybe called out a little bit unfairly for that interception. Would have been a great catch if he'd been able to make it. And I guess you try to knock it down, but that's a tough deal for a rookie playing in a Super Bowl. But in any event, I just think, they did what they did all year. Look at what they did at the end of the game against Tampa Bay. I mean, there's a perfect example. And if you look at it, the Tampa Bay game, the NFC Championship game against the 49ers all came down to Matthew Stafford leading a drive late. I think that's kind of how you make your legacy, right? If you're an NFL quarterback.
Is he a Hall of Famer now?
I think he's on his way. I'll be honest with you. I haven't analyzed his stats enough compared to guys of his ilk. But I certainly think he's got the resume to be considered. And now that he's got a Super Bowl win, I think you certainly have to look into what he does here over however many years he has left in his career. If he can take the Rams back, then yeah, I would say so. Because look, he's got as many Super Bowl wins now as Aaron Rodgers. And I think if you ask most people, is he a Hall of Famer? They'd probably tell you yes, right? And Brett Favre, for that matter, and who is in the Hall of Fame, and so many others, and guys who haven't won a Super Bowl. So I think he certainly merits consideration.
Dave Eanet here on Sports Talk Chicago. Dave, when are the Bears going to be in a Super Bowl?
Well, hey, they've been in two of them, John. I mean, let's not get greedy here. Yeah, I think you have to walk, right? You have to crawl before you can walk. And, I think now they've taken some steps that I think at least you would hope get them pointed in the right direction. And certainly it's not going to happen tomorrow. I saw the odds for next year are out, and I think there are only 5 teams with longer odds next year than the Bears, which, that's where they are. And but I like what they've put together from the brain trust standpoint. If they let these guys do their jobs, and I like Justin Fields. I mean, I think you can't come to rash judgments or conclusions based on what he did this year under very difficult circumstances. So when's it going to be? So much has to, think about it. So much has to happen. But if you had asked fans in Cincinnati this time last year, when are the Bengals ever going to be in a Super Bowl? Is there any way, especially not knowing how Burrow would come through the ACL surgery, coming off a bad year? They had if you look at their combined record for the past couple of years, I think they were the first team to get to the Super Bowl after the kind of one-loss record of the winning percentage they had over the past X number of years. So you just don't know. And things are so less predictable now, I believe, in a lot of sports, but certainly in the NFL. And it's just hard to say based on what a team did last year. You look at the schedule and everybody says, okay, here's your schedule. And this is going to be a really tough schedule next year. But then those teams lose certain guys retire, guys get hurt. And all of a sudden, what looked like a tough schedule isn't so tough. And conversely, what looks like a really easy schedule can suddenly become much more difficult. So I think all those factors enter into it.
How'd you gauge Justin Fields' rookie season?
I was encouraged. I think when you looked at him when he was healthy, I think that, and as he got some experience, as he got kind of some reps and just began getting more of a feel for it. I mean, I think you look at that Monday night game against Pittsburgh. I came away from that certainly feeling encouraged. Some of his late season performances, he's got a ways to go, but I think that's true of any young quarterback. And I think you have to build the right pieces around him. But I think that the fact that, and I watched him play in college, as I guess the whole world did, right? And I think the guy's got a world of talent, and I think he's got the right mindset. And that's the most important thing, John. I mean, he clearly is a guy who wants to do well. And I think if you talk to anyone who's known the guy, who's had any interaction with him, that's what you hear. I mean, he really wants to make himself into a great NFL quarterback. So I think that's half the battle. Maybe not half, but that's a lot of it. But when you factor in his talent, I think you have to feel pretty good about it.
What did you see out of him in college that made you so excited about him?
I think the accuracy, now here's something that he didn't have last year. It was the low turnover rate. I mean, he didn't throw interceptions in college. It's again, he's playing at a totally different level, and he's playing in a new system in his first year. And there's a lot of, not that he hadn't felt pressure. I mean, look, he played at the highest level in college football, playing in the playoffs. Certainly, he was as gutty a performer in that game against Clemson. I mean, I'll still look back. I can't believe the guy got up, let alone threw 6 touchdown passes or whatever he did. But I just think he's clearly a guy who wants to succeed. He's accurate. I think he's a smart football player, and he can make plays with his legs without being a guy who's strictly a runner. I think he's a guy who can make those plays, but at the same time, he's still going to be somebody we'll look at as being a very accurate passer with a good arm. And I think you could see that in his college days, and I think you've seen glimpses of that in his brief time with the Bears.
Are you expecting a bigger improvement knowing it's not going to be Matt Nagy's offense? It's going to be Luke Getsy.
You know what? I guess I'm hoping that we're going to see a major leap. I don't think anyone really has a feel for what the offense is going to look like. I mean, he spoke when he addressed the media last week. It was kind of in broad terms about how he wants to get to know everybody and the offense, know who his players are. I appreciate that. I mean, I would be, I guess, skeptical if I heard a newly named offensive coordinator step up there his first time meeting with the media and say, okay, we're doing A, B, and C. We're going to do this. We're going to throw the ball X number of times a game. We're going to run for X yards a game. I mean, I think he doesn't really know yet. Hopefully he's pouring over tapes and figuring it all out. But I think there are a lot of questions. Who are the players going to be? I mean, who are his receivers going to be next year? I think that's a big question. The future of Allen Robinson, I think, is still looming over this team. Long-term future of the running back situation, I think, is a question. So I think they got to get all those decisions made. But I'm encouraged. I mean, I think you look at his pedigree, you look at his background, and you have to feel. I don't have a problem, John, with him being a first-time offensive coordinator. I mean, that's one thing. Everybody needs a chance. Everybody needs an opportunity, right? Sean McVay needed a chance to be a head coach, and everybody's got to get that. So did Matt Nagy, and it obviously worked out a little better for McVay. But Nagy will probably get another shot somewhere, certainly as a coordinator, and you'll see what happens down the road with him. But I think that I like where he's coming from, and certainly you got to think that if they kept him around in Green Bay, that given their offense, and there was a guy playing the quarterback position there, probably had a lot of say in who the coaches were. Then it's probably speaks well for him, I would think.
So you're not worried about Poles and Eberflus not having any experience. That shouldn't be a problem necessarily for the Bears.
I don't think so. I mean, I'm a believer that people earn their opportunities. And I think if you hear what others have said about both those guys, and granted, now those may be people who are friends and admirers of them, but I think, you look at the things that have been said about Poles coming out of Kansas City, and sometimes people say nice things about a guy because they want to get him to move on. So, I don't think these are false recommendations. I think that he seems like he's a very sharp guy. I like what he said in his opening remarks to the media. I like the way he's approached the job. And Eberflus has certainly, he's got the background, I think. And I know some people say, well, why didn't they go out and get an offensive coach? Well, he's the head coach. He's not the defensive coordinator. I like the fact he said, I'm not calling the defensive plays. He's got a guy now in Williams who's going to do that. And I think that that's important. I think that a head coach in the NFL really is a CEO. I mean, to a certain extent in college football too, and maybe in all sports these days, because it seems like half your time is taken up dealing with the media, right? And the personnel decisions are largely being made by the general manager and the scouting department, the personnel department. And so your job is to coach football, but you're coaching the guys who are coaching it in practice, right? You're running practice, but you're doing a lot of things. And I think that ultimately he's got to be the guy who picks the right offensive coordinator and the right defensive coordinator. And it's just because he hasn't coached offense doesn't mean he doesn't understand it. As a matter of fact, I think in some ways, if you're a defensive coordinator, you may understand the offense better than the offensive coaches, because you're the guy trying to stop it, right? You're studying the tapes. You're studying offenses. So I think you have to have a feeling for offense, even if you are a defensive guy.
You know, you've covered the Bears for a long time. Why aren't you cynical yet?
Well, I haven't covered them as closely as I used to. I talk about them on the air. I used to cover them very closely, and they were very good when I was traveling with them and back in the Super Bowl year and back in the Ditka era. And they were a team of characters. But the sport has changed. The game has changed. The role of the media in all of this has changed. We had access to guys. You can go up to a player one-on-one in the locker room, which today it's much more difficult to do. And I don't know. My nature, John, quite frankly, isn't to be cynical. I've just never been that way. And that's not to say that I won't be critical and I won't see things I don't like, but I just think that I'm hopeful. I guess every time there's a new start, you hope for better things. I felt that way when Nagy was hired. I thought, hey, this sounds like they got a good guy here. And look, his first year, things were pretty encouraging. But sometimes things go south, right? And hopefully they will not go in that direction for Eberflus and for the new staff.
What's your expectation for them next year?
Well, I haven't broken down the schedule, wins and losses. I'd be disappointed if they didn't take at least a little bit of a jump. Maybe that gets them. Well, they can't be 500, but maybe they're a game under or a game over. I mean, I would think that would be a bit of that would be a nice start for them, I would say. And if they could do a little bit better than that, maybe go something like 9 and 8, 10 and 7, whatever. They do have the extra game at home. I think that should help them. And maybe it doesn't get them a wild card spot, but maybe it at least keeps them in the conversation. And to paraphrase what Mayor Lightfoot said, I think, when the whole Arlington Heights thing started, maybe keep them relevant later in the year. That would be nice. And I'm optimistic they can do that, because I think one of the things polls I think will do is make sure they locks up Roquan Smith, and I think the defense will be good enough to keep them in the conversation. And now can they take another step with Fields and with the offense? And that's on Luke Getsy, the offensive staff, and we don't know yet, but my inkling is that they will at least marginally improve. It's tough. Guys have to learn a new playbook. Anytime you change head coaches, there's a transition period, and sometimes that can go the other way too. So you just hope. More often than not, though, I think there's a little bit of improvement.
Dave Eanet, still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Dave, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, Northwestern basketball. How's the season been going?
Well, it's an interesting season, John. It's certainly, from a one-loss standpoint, I think it's been difficult because they haven't gotten as many wins as they probably deserve. Although I guess it is the old, you are what your record says you are. But if you look at it, they've lost 9 Big Ten games, and 8 of those have been by single digits, including a pair to the first place team in the conference, Illinois. And they had Michigan State on the ropes once. They beat them on the road when they rematched them. They beat Indiana. They're right there late in the game, last couple of minutes, a 1 or 2 possession game with Wisconsin. Maryland, they split with a Maryland team that's really struggling. They've only had one game where they really, you would look at it and say it was a blowout, and that was the game at Purdue. They get another chance at them coming up. I believe that this is the best Northwestern team since the NCAA tournament team in 2017. If you look at their remaining games, their last 5 games in particular, it's a very manageable schedule, and they're winnable games. And so if they could somehow get in the high teens in wins and maybe get to 500 in the conference and win a couple games in the Big Ten tournament, right? All of a sudden, maybe you get yourself onto the bubble, or at least you get yourself into the NIT. And I think that would be a step for this team. It's too bad they weren't able to close out a couple of those games that, they first time with Illinois, they had a 6-point lead with about, I think, 8 minutes to go. And they were tied with less than 2 minutes to go, but just couldn't close it out.
Well, this is an improvement over last year, right? They're doing much better this year than they were last season.
No doubt about it. I mean, I think this is a much better team. I mean, again, I look at it in certain ways. Last year they started really well in the COVID season, but it's so hard to get a handle on that. They were ranked. They were 3-0 in the Big Ten. They had a win at home over Michigan State. They won at Indiana. They beat Ohio State, and then they had to go on the road and play Iowa and Michigan back to back. Luka Garza, and last year was the freshman Hunter Dickinson, who had just come on, and it was an experienced Michigan team, and those 2 games, I think, kind of put them back on their heels and sent them into a kind of a deep tailspin where they had some chances, kind of like this year, but couldn't get the wins. I think they've done a better job managing games this year late in the game. They had some games earlier where I think late game situations, maybe they weren't as sharp as they needed to be. You can make that argument for the game Sunday in Champaign, where they came from 18 down. They're down by 1 with a few minutes to go, and then just couldn't make a shot when they needed to. But I think overall, I think they've handled those situations a little better and given themselves a chance. That's what you want. So we'll see what they do here over the final 6 games. But I'm encouraged by what they've done to this point.
Would you say right now they're in a decent enough position to make the tournament?
But to make the NCAA tournament, I think they need some help. I think they're going to need to even if they certainly they could use a win over Purdue this week at home. And Purdue, the last couple of times out, it's been a little shaky. Almost lost to Maryland Sunday, won by 1 point, and they needed a block shot at the end to win that. And they lost handily at Michigan. And the thing about it is the Big Ten is so unpredictable this year. I mean, it's the good teams in the conference, the teams at the top deserve to be there. They're all really good. I mean, Illinois, Wisconsin is the one surprise. They were picked to finish 10th, and there they are, just a half game, a game off the lead. And Purdue's right there. You knew they were going to be good, and they are. But at the same time, Purdue beats Illinois twice, and Purdue then goes and loses and gets blown out at Michigan. And then Michigan turns around and loses at home to Ohio State, and which had just lost to Rutgers, which loses in overtime at Northwestern. All of a sudden reels off 3 straight wins over ranked teams, and a couple big road. They win at Wisconsin this weekend. Very tough to do. So that part of it's the weird part, John, because it's just so hard to predict what anybody's going to do. Illinois has got a tough game coming up. They got to go to Rutgers, and Rutgers is very hard to beat out there in Piscataway. So, what is Northwestern could, if you look at what they have left, they have one more ranked team. That's Purdue this week, and then they've got the remaining games They've got 2 with Minnesota. They've got a rematch with Nebraska, a team they blew out in Lincoln. And that's only won 1 Big Ten game as we speak. You look at this and you think, okay, these are games they can win. They go to Penn State. Again, that's a winnable game for them. So if they win all those games and they win a couple games in the Big Ten tournament, then I think they get themselves in position. But again, to predict those wins is very hard to do because it's hard to win on the road. It's hard to say that this team's better than another team because you see teams win when you don't expect them to.
Dave, before we finish up today, last question. Where'd the nickname Mr. Cat come from? How'd you get it?
It's a funny story, and I will preface it by saying it's not something I ever endorsed or asked for or ever use myself. I answer to it because it's kind of become a thing where people, especially people around Northwestern, will throw it out there. Fitz, Coach Collins, but it was actually bestowed upon me, for better or worse, by my former colleague, my friend David Kaplan. I don't know why, but he and I used to do some basketball games together, some Northwestern games on radio. And when he was here at WGN, he started referring to me as Mr. Cat. And for some reason, it caught on and other people started using it. And so I have him to thank for it.
Do you like being called it or no?
I feel a little awkward, to be honest with you, because I don't think of myself that way. And quite frankly, if there's any Mr. Cat at Northwestern, he's the guy coaching the football team.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much, Dave, for joining me. Always a pleasure to have you on. Best wishes, of course, with Northwestern, and looking forward to the next time we chat.
John, always great being with you. Congrats on all your success and the podcast. And anytime, feel free to give me a shout.